Gentlemen, we have UFC Apex Fight Night 109 Dolidze versus Hernandez going down this weekend, August 9th, at that UFC Apex Boy in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is going to be the week I 100%. Because last week I thought I was big brain by giving like the most technical over breakdowns of every single fight and thinking that I was just big wrinkly brain Albert Einstein of the MMA community. That's really how I felt picking Nathan Fletcher to beat Rinya Nakamura. And this is about how I felt whenever that body kick landed. But this week, man, it's going to be a different story. I'm going to trust my gut, and I'm not going to do mental gymnastics to pick fighters like Nathan Fletcher over Rinya Nakamura. Not that this even matters anyways. I have 2 hours worth of footage of like probably the best video that I've ever uploaded that I just need to get through and then post. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. We're going to just get right into it. So the prelims are going to start with Cody Brundage versus Eryk McConico. And I had to double take and make sure that I wasn't tweaking because this fight is going to be happening at light heavyweight. And when's the last time we've ever seen Cody Brundage fight at light heavyweight? Eryk McConico made his debut against that boy, Nursultan Rozaboev, and he looked pretty undersized even for middleweight. So what the heck? Cody Brundage, though, he's kind of like the UFC career starter pack. Like Bo Nickel, Mansour Abdul Malik. If you're a serious contender, you'll smoke his pack with minimal issues. But Cody Brundage is also the only guy in the UFC who can fraud check someone without beating them, as we've seen with actually those two people that I've spoken about just right now. People lost a lot of respect for Mansour Abdul Malik because he finished Cody Brundage with a headbutt, and then the bout got scored with the rounds that had been clocked up until that point. And then also, Bo Nickel just had a really messy fight with this guy, and he was getting out-wrestled at certain points of the Cody Brundage fight before he got the choke. He apologized for the performance. It was so, mediocre, to be honest. Since 2023, Cody Brundage has actually knocked out Zachary Reese, Julian Marquez, and Jacob Malkoun, which means in his last 6 fights, he's 3-2-1. There was one no contest that came due to an eye poke over Abdul Razak Al Hassan. The general theme here is that you're either a hyped contender with a passable skill set at minimum and you beat him, or you get folded. And I'm thinking it's going to be the latter this time because this dude's already been knocked out by Nursultan Rozaboev, and he did goose egg in that fight. Literally nothing for the first round, and then he comes out in the second, Eryk McConico, and he just gets spilled. And it was a really good highlight for Nursultan Rozaboev, who has knockouts, but he hadn't been getting people up out of there since Bruno Ferreira. That was a couple of years ago after he beat RoboCop. It's also worth noting that Mansour Abdul Malik not committing the foul that made it so that Cody Brundage was unable to continue may have resulted in him actually losing the decision because it came down to that round 3, and you can never really count Cody Brundage out of one of these fights. McConico is going to set the UFC record for visually being the smallest light heavyweight we've ever seen in the cage, and he's going to even look dwarfed compared to Cody Brundage is what I'm thinking. Everyone kind of looks like a midget compared to Nursultan Rozaboev since he's 6'5", official on the UFC website, but he was absolutely fodder in that matchup with Nursultan, and I think he's going to get sparked again in this one. Nobody remembers the debut of McConico because he actually did nothing before getting knocked out. Brundage is actually kind of dangerous, so I think that I will predict that he wins via round 1 knockout in this fight, and that's it. I'm telling you, I'm not going to be overthinking this anymore. I'm just going to, I know these fighters. Dude, I watch the fights every weekend. I need to stop psyoping myself into thinking that it's going to go a certain way whenever I know it's going to go another one. Usually with this type of thing, your first inclination is going to be the most correct, so we're just going to lean into that. The next fight is going to be Gabriella Fernandes versus Julija Stoliarenko. Gabriella Fernandes. This is going to be at women's flyweight, 125. I don't know. Maybe I pick the woman who packed up Wong Tong instead of let's look at that record, 11-8-1, 11-9-2. But I think that this is also going to be her matches from kickboxing that they factored onto the UFC record. In MMA, this lady is 11-8-1. Again, I'm not thinking about this too much. Stoliarenko, she just lost to Luana Carolina and Chelsea Chandler. Julia either gets an armbar or she gets toasted on the feet and finished herself, usually with some variation of ground strikes. Gabriella Fernandes has been in there with Jasmine Jasudavicius, and that might have even been a very close and competitive fight that she lost by split decision. And she also beat Carly Judas, who we just saw show out at UFC 318, and also Wong Tong, like I just mentioned. And she's made a 2-win streak out of these two ladies that we know are great strikers, respectively. They're feeding a win to Gabriella Fernandes, and I think she's going to win it via round 1 KO. Julija Stoliarenko, what you doing, man? What is she doing in there? Hunter Campbell called Gabriella Fernandes and then was like, you want to make some money? And she was like, yeah. And then they gave her this fight. The third fight on the card is going to be Uros versus Gilbert Urbina. I'm actually kind of excited to watch this one for some weird reason. I feel like it's going to be a banger fight. Both of these fighters, the reason why I think it's going to be a banger is because both of these fighters have been blicked up before in their last bouts. They've been knocked out brutally. And one is going to be to Charles Radke, and he lasted significantly longer in the first round. I mean, it's the first round, what does it really matter? Versus Uros Medic, who got knocked out by Punahele Soriano. Punahele Soriano came down from 185, though, and he had knockout power there. In the X185er, I mean, he hits hard, right? But aside from the fact that he got knocked out by that dude who has knockout power up a weight class, Uros Medic himself does have finishing capabilities. I think I might have even picked him to beat Punahele Soriano, just because I perceived Uros Medic to exclusively have a vulnerability to being exposed on the ground, because he'd only been submitted prior to this once by Oralbai in his debut at 170. Oralbai fought at 170 in his debut, and it was pretty crazy how Oralbai looked virtually the same as he does at lightweight. The other time that Uros Medic had been subbed was by Jalen Turner. Medic isn't a bad striker. He's composed, and he's displayed the ability to set up finishes in the past with his boxing, even with unorthodox strikes sometimes, like back fist, which he knocked out a prime Matthew Simmelsberger, who was moving like King Von from 2022 through 2023. Urbina has gotten done up by Radke after he made it into the UFC, and also by Brian Battle on the Ultimate Fighter. In the Radke fight, it was simply a check left that got him, but in the Brian Battle fight, they had wrestled for a round. Urbina was actually controlling the pace of the first, then he gassed out, Brian Battle took the back and RNC'd him. There was a very specific set of circumstances that led Gilbert Urbina to get his first win of the UFC over Orion Koska. It was a rib injury that Koska had sustained in the first round through the grappling that, I mean, Urbina was controlling a large portion of. Koska got up, he was grabbing his rib, clearly compromised. He comes out in the second round, Gilbert Urbina, and then he front kicks this guy right on the injured spot. Koska crumples and the ref waves off the fight after Gilbert Urbina did land that front kick. The idea here is that Uros Medic is either going to win via knockout or Urbina is going to get a submission. But even with what I said about Medic having this weakness on the ground, he's not super green there. He has gone to the ground in other fights, survived, and then still gotten knockouts. It's not like he's totally inexperienced there. Jalen Turner did beat him up first before he subbed him, and Oralbai is just a better grappler than both of these fighters, so Medic probably does break down Gilbert Urbina, and I'm going to call a Medic round 2 TKO in this one. The next fight is Joselyne Edwards versus Priscila Cachoeira. This is at women's bantamweight. I always look up what the Brazilian last names translate to into English, because they actually do mean something every time. Oliveira, you guys aren't going to believe this, it's olive tree. Cachoeira, waterfall. I thought it would have something to do with trees, but I was wrong. Priscila Cachoeira knocked out Joselyne Nunez for free, and this is not going to be that type of fight. Joselyne Edwards is going to come out there and wrestle. Edwards is generally able to handle herself on the feet and is only losing to women skilled enough to tie her up on the ground, much like Nora Cornell or Eileen Perez. Eileen Perez is an absolute gangster, and it's safe to say that after watching Carol Rosa versus Nora Cornell last weekend. Cornell in her fight with Joselyne Edwards, she didn't really do much on the ground except for reverse positions to get back to the striking, where she soundly outstruck Joselyne Edwards, but Joselyne Edwards had like 9 minutes of control in that fight. She just didn't really do much with it. Cachoeira was 10-8'd by Jasmine Jasudavicius in their fight, and arguably 10-7 in the second round, and this was all in the grappling. She just played in this fight, and then in other ones, like against Jillian Roberts, whenever she was fighting down a weight class, that she is someone who can be controlled on the ground by high-level grapplers for this weight class, and at the other one too. Jasmine is a flyweight, and she still took this fight with Priscila Cachoeira, who egregiously missed weight to the point where they had to fight at bantamweight, and she still beat her up really badly. This is one of the worst one-sided beatings I've ever seen in WMMA. And I think that Joselyne Edwards can come out and ragdoll her the exact same way. Edwards, she's not as active with her ground and pound, but she'll be free to get takedowns and attempt subs whenever she wants. She just has to time them towards the beginning of each round in order to win, because Priscila Cachoeira does have some relatively tidy boxing, but I don't think it'll be any threat to Joselyne Edwards. She likely sniffs a victory out of this matchup, so I'm going to predict her winning via decision, maybe even getting active with ground and pound, learning from her mistakes in the Cornell fight and stopping this one, but Edwards via decision is what we're going to go with. The next fight is going to be Elijah Smith versus Toshiomi Kazama. Toshiomi, he gets boomed on by everyone that he fights. Even whenever he won his last fight over Gregorio Charalampos, who's, I don't think he's in the UFC anymore, he was close to being finished at the very beginning. He had to come back. I think it was a triangle choke that he had landed. After he almost got stopped in the first round, he made it out, and then in the second, Gregorio had completely gassed out, and he was fooling around on the guard of Toshiomi, and he got subbed. If Elijah Smith can stay cool like he did in his debut against Vince Morales, where he almost got caught in a Darce choke, but he scrambled out of it, I think he can win comfortably against Toshiomi. He could probably knock him out in the first round too, because this guy is not going to put up much resistance on the feet. It's literally just Hail Mary sub attempts that gets this guy wins. Otherwise, against Garrett Armfield and Rinya Nakamura, he's getting face planted very early on in the first round. Like if Justin Gaethje is the human highlight, Toshiomi Kazama is the human clip. Elijah Smith likely knows that he can get a knockout in the first round, so he's going to go for it. But he just needs to watch out for that Hail Mary sub like Sharalampo's Gregorio caught. And he landed himself in this triangle choke, being overzealous, trying to finish the fight after he'd gassed out, dumping his tank in the first round, again trying to get the finish. Something that gives me more confidence in Elijah Smith is that he didn't display cardio issues, and he beat a guy with a lot of fights in the UFC for his debut. Again, I don't think he's going to need cardio because Kazama he's going to get knocked out in the first round. And the reason why is because a part of Kazama's process every single time is getting beat up at the very beginning of the fight before he does anything. And he's only 1-3, surviving his opponent's initial onslaught, so I think it's going to be another one of these outings where he just gets slapped again. Elijah Smith is going to win via round 1 KO. Julius Walker versus Rafael Cerqueira at light heavyweight. The Julius Juicebox Walker title run is starting now. There isn't a single chance that this dude, Rafael Cerqueira, who's coming off of 2 consecutive losses where he was finished in the first round, locks in against the guy who at the very least made it to a decision against Alonzo Minifield. Rafael Cerqueira did nothing in either of these fights as well, against Modestas Bukauskas, who closed off the cage and knocked him out, and then Ibo Aslan, who did the exact same thing. And we saw Ibo Aslan, he has a tendency to freeze up against certain fighters. Against Billy Alicana, he was not about to engage in the pocket, or even against the Pleasure Man in his debut. It took him 3 rounds to get that knockout, but he knew that Rafael Cerqueira was barbecue chicken, so he went right into the phone booth and he chinned him, and it was super easy. Rafael Cerqueira is the reason why Modestas Bukauskas got his second win in the 3-fight win streak that he's currently on. He gave him the momentum that he needed to beat Iwan Kudalaba directly after this, and that's because Rafael Cerqueira is a training wheels opponent who the UFC gives to fighters to be nice. They overstated the ability of Walker in his debut, and they're paying him back with the free W because they brought him up too fast and having him fight Alonzo Minifield in his debut, and as a consequence, he lost his undefeated record, so they're stat padding him. 205 definitely needs more prospects, so this guy needs a brutal finish in round 1. I'm going to predict Julius Walker wins via brutal finish in round 1, a walk-off KO. That's going to take us on to the main card. Both of these fights are kind of a blur to me. The guys in the main event, each of them are not really the most entertaining fighters. I could say in the past that Anthony Hernandez was a very entertaining fighter. It's the cardio wrestling, dude. If you have a lesser skill set, he's going to finish you, and he's going to make it grueling and very violent. But guys like Dolidze, they're good at surviving 5 rounds. And that's even with his suspect cardio as well. And in the fight with Nasruddin Imavov, I really appreciated how much Imavov beat up this guy because he only wins or loses by decisions, at least lately. I don't think this guy has gotten a single finish in one of his fights in the UFC since the year 2022, which is like going on 4 years now. It was the grappling ability of Brendan Allen that kept him alive in the Hernandez fight. I really hope that we just get a methodical beatdown through 15 or 20 minutes and like around 3 or 4 TKO for Anthony Hernandez. He just wears on that gas tank of Dolidze. It's never been that good. Let's just talk about other fights on the main card before we get there. The next fight is going to be Eryk Anders versus Christian Leroy Duncan, certified lover Duncan. And this is going to be happening at middleweight. I want to pick Eryk Anders so badly, dude. And that's only because I think that Christian Leroy Duncan is so mid. Oh my goodness. But Anders is just way too inconsistent. And whenever he's off, he looks so terrible. And this is kind of like a regular occurrence. Even in fights like his last W against Weidman, he looked pretty crummy, but he still finished the fight. It's the mileage of Anders at 38 years old versus the boring pacing of Duncan, which he still has time to work out. Granted, he's 8 years younger. He's 30. I guess his birthday was on July 24th, so happy birthday, Christian Leroy Duncan. Woo! If I had a Donald Trump shroom vape with me, I would take 5 blinkers off of it, and then I would pick Eryk Anders. But I have zero confidence in Christian Leroy Duncan to beat up anybody who isn't this uncle. Anybody better, I would double take here. But speaking of the Donald Trump shroom vape, Eryk Anders has completely tanked his physique through years of drug abuse. He said that he was out drinking every single night and using party drugs, and he just got clean so he could get custody of his children back. I feel like John Anik right now talking about this. And he did this last year in 2024, so that's the reason why he's able to consistently make middleweight. He looked a lot sloppier at 205, and he was fighting there a lot more regularly. Anders did retain the beer drinking physique, even as a 185er, and he's likely going to gas out like he does in all of his fights, and he'll not place a miracle overhand right to fold Duncan before that happens. Like, I'm not tweaking for second guessing Christian Leroy Duncan in this fight. I don't think so, right? I mean, this dude lost to Armin Petrosian, and he's had some really stinky winning performances that all go to decision, like his last fight with Andrei Pulayev. I think that the cardio and frame of Christian Leroy Duncan will prevail, but there's not going to be a finish in this fight, so certified lover Duncan via decision. That's going to be my pick. The next fight will be John Matsumoto versus Miles Johns. So a couple of things. Johns is not a better boxer than Rob Font, and he handed Matsumoto his first loss and his last loss. Lima is not a better grappler than Matsumoto, and he was able to choke out Miles Johns in his last fight. In the stand-up, I'd venture to say that even though Lima has displayed to be maybe more of a better defensive striker than John Matsumoto, because he didn't get knocked out by Payton Talbot, I still wouldn't say that he's the same degree of striker as John Matsumoto. I think that the frame of Rob Font and also that sticky jab was what gave John Matsumoto the problem. He just got his face busted up by the lead hand of Rob Font. And Miles Johns, lucky for John Matsumoto in this fight, is not a jab-heavy boxer. He's more of an overhand guy and a wrestler guy. The low output of Miles Johns is going to allow John Matsumoto to close off the cage and get to the hips and control until Miles Johns either gives up his back or he potentially even gets to take mount from one of these takedowns and he can finish an arm triangle like John Castaneda was able to. But he had been tagging Miles Johns the entire fight before then. You don't really know how these fighters come out after their first losses, though. We saw Tatsuro Taira locked in after he lost to Brandon Royval, and also what Joshua Van's loss to Charles Johnson did whenever he was still undefeated. Even Almabayev losing to Manel Kape as well. Once a glaring hole has been shown in your game, you know exactly what to work on. John Matsumoto was doing a lot of things right, leading up to him getting this ranked fight with Rob Font, which he got turned away in. My theory is that losing makes undefeated fighters better, and they learn from their mistakes in most instances. I want to say that John Matsumoto is a learner, and he's not a guy who's just going to fold up after he takes a bad loss. And it wasn't really even a bad loss. He just learned. You either win or you learn, you know? And Matsumoto, I think he'll win on output. I think that he won't have to worry about the sticky jab intercepting his offense in either the boxing or the takedown entries, and he will comfortably win a decision against Miles Johns. If he's really made those improvements, he'll choke him in the second or third round, but decision is safe. I'm going to pick decision for Matsumoto. The next fight up the card is Andre Fili versus Christian Rodriguez. Shout out Andre Fili. I was looking through his record. He has a bunch of fights. I didn't realize how much fights he had in the UFC. Like, a majority of all of his fights, win, lose, or no contest, are in the UFC. They all happen in this organization. But I don't think Andre Fili is winning this. If he does, I will be super surprised. Rodriguez was caught in a sub the last time that he lost, but it's no fault to him. Erosa just has really good jiu-jitsu, and that was literally the submission of the year in 2024, so we issue him a pass for that. And Fili has tricky jiu-jitsu as well. He's trained in Texas with John Danaher, but he's more of a scrambler than a submission guy. In the past, aggressive top-controlling wrestlers like Bryce Mitchell secured 7 takedowns on Andre Fili in 15 minutes, and most recently, Andre Fili has lost to Melky Costa, and he was punished for shooting a takedown of his own. Fili, he jumped right into the guillotine of Melchizedek Costa. Rodriguez is likely going to be the one who's shooting the takedowns in this fight, and I think that he will score them at will over Andre Fili. At this point, C-Rod, he deserves respect from the entire division. If you are a grappler, you may need to revise your game plan to be a bit more standing, because he's gotten tests like Austin Bashi, a great power grappler in MMA, and also Raul Rosas. And even though they're both inexperienced, they're able to grapple the lights out. And they were able to get takedowns on Christian Rodriguez, but not effectively control him. And they were even like backpacking him and stuff. And Christian Rodriguez is just super well versed in knowing the defense from all these different positions. I think that there's more career upside with Christian Rodriguez. There's less mileage, and there's more of a chance for him to display what he's been developing in the striking to match the grappling capabilities that he does have. I'd only pick Fili on the basis of him being able to catch C-Rod, but he's usually the one who gets caught. Christian Rodriguez has a better track record of being able to stay in fights and not just randomly get chinned. And also, Andre Fili be getting wrestled too. So I think that Rodriguez is going to win a decision here. Maybe a little bit sniffy, but I think that it's pretty sound. I don't think anything weird is going to happen. All right, Iasmin Lucindo versus Angela Hill at women's strawweight in the featured fight. I just realized that I talked about 3 different WMMA fights for this card. Oh my goodness. We're going to be in for an absolute show. I don't have a single reason for why Angela Hill doesn't get clinch spam or wrestled in this fight by a Brazilian woman with a judo black belt, other than Angela Hill saying that it's not going to happen, and that's literally her job to say that that won't happen to her. She's been calling for title shots too after this, with an 18-14 record and coming off of 1 win over Ketlin Souza, who we just saw last weekend is not good at fighting, and she still only beat that girl via split decision. That's kind of the consistent theme of Angela Hill's career. She's going to split decision with these ladies, and she's usually losing them. They're always close fights. She's never winning decisively. Before, in fights with women who actually did something in this weight class afterwards, like Dern or Ricci, they followed grappling game plans to freeze out Hill in stand-up exchanges and to control the clinch. Even though Hill has been doing a relatively better job of stuffing takedowns in her fights as of recently, she's not getting off the cage and she's just getting frozen there. Lucindo is going to at least try to grapple, and she'll get in on the shot whether it ends up being completed or not. And if it doesn't, Lucindo is just going to hold her on the cage and grind out a win on the cards. Hill has never been a striking threat at any point in her career. For all the different styles that she's encountered, she has no clear path to victory other than just like moving and jabbing or leg kick. I don't like, how does she win fights? Like, does anybody How does she win fights? Lucindo versus Lemos is maybe one of the worst fights that I've ever seen in my life. I think across the 15 minutes that fight took place in, there was about 16 significant strikes between the two of them, 12 for Lemos and like 4 for Lucindo, and they all came in like the third round for Lucindo. Like, worst fight I've ever seen in my life. But the reason why this fight was so garbage was because neither of them wanted to lose. Lemos does actually hit very hard, and Iasmin didn't want to get clipped. Angela Hill isn't that same threat, so Lucindo is going to get in there and try to work her judo black belt. Lucindo is going to win this fight via decision. Get me out of here. Steve Erceg versus Ode Osbourne. This is going to be happening at bantamweight because of the short notice replacement. Steve Erceg was preparing to fight with Hyun-Sung Park, who got humiliated and humiliated me last weekend, but we forgive him. You know, water under the bridge, Hyun-Sung Park. You're all good in the hood. But he's going to be fighting Ode Osbourne now, Steve Erceg. I kind of have dwindling faith in Steve Erceg's boxing and in his chin, but he's only lost to the best flyweights as of late, and he has good wins over Alessandro Costa, and a good win over Matt Schnell, too. A good win over Matt Schnell before his 3-fight skid, which came to Alexandre Pantoja, understandable. Kai Kara France, a little bit less understandable, but still understandable. He got knocked out in that fight. And then Brandon Moreno, we made it to the end, but he still got beat up. Ode Osbourne, he has power, but not really finishing ability. For all the times that I've seen him drop people, they usually recover. Like Ronaldo Rodriguez, I picked Ronaldo Rodriguez to win that fight, and he got like spilled out in the middle of the cage, and he just recovered. Other than his last performance against Luis Gurul, who is he even in the UFC still? I'm not sure if he's been scheduled for another fight or if he will be. That guy was a can. And that was kind of a one-off performance for Ode Osbourne. Aside from this, he's just been getting grappled and dominated. Whenever these fighters who do get dropped by Ode Osbourne recover, they either knock him out or they just grapple him and dominate him because that's the clearest path to victory against this dude. The chin of Erceg, though, is what's going to make me tentative to immediately side with him, but dudes aren't really getting walk-off KO'd at flyweight. Unless your name is Joshua Van, you're not walk-off KOing people. Or Charles Johnson. But I mean, Ode did beat Charles Johnson via decision. But like I said before, he did make it to the final bell. Steve Erceg against Pantoja and Moreno, which is much better than a majority of feats that Osbourne has displayed. Plus, if we're comparing chins, we know what it takes for Ode Osbourne to be KO'd. And this was demonstrated in fights against Tyson Nam and also Manel Cap. If Erceg blows this, I will never believe in him ever again. To me, though, it sort of feels like the UFC is reloading a quick save on his progression by allowing him to fight the debut gatekeeper, Ode Osbourne, as a favor to him for forcing him to take hard fights whenever he clearly wasn't ready for them. Matt Schnell got this dude a title shot at a time where there was actually no contenders for the belt in flyweight. In 2024, if you displayed any level of finishing capabilities at 125, that made you a title contender. I kind of like the slow build for Steve Erceg this time. I don't know. I think he should be able to handle Ode Osbourne, who's likely coming off the couch to replace Hyun-Sung Park. Steve Erceg, he's gotten a full camp, and this will also help him too. So, shout out Ode Osbourne for making sure that this event didn't fall through, or this fight didn't fall through. But I don't think that he's going to win this. I will pick Steve Erceg to win via round 3 TKO over Ode Osbourne. And that will take us up to the main event of the evening, which is going to be Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Hernandez at middleweight. In my head, whenever I'm playing it out, I think this is probably going to be a boring fight. Before, like I was talking about, I like Anthony Hernandez's style, but just not that much. Just because it is very grapple heavy. He's a cardio grappler. Roman Dolidze, though, he's pretty physically strong, and he may be strong enough to stalemate the wrestling offense of Anthony Hernandez. Until he gets tired, that is. I can see much of this fight being frozen in sequences that neither person allows the other fighter to advance through. Like they're holding each other in half guard. Or one gets to a dominant position and the other guy's just holding him there. And they're not able to advance or to get any type of ground strikes off. In a perfect world, the ref will just stand them up whenever this happens. But it didn't go that way in Hernandez versus Allen. They were doing just enough in activity to where the ref didn't get to intervene. I think at the higher levels of this division, Anthony Hernandez isn't going to have the start grappling advantage over a lot of these people that he did whenever he was first starting out. So I'm using Brendan Allen versus Fluffy as a framework for understanding a fight like Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Hernandez. I think that it pretty much goes the exact same way. It could be a trash fight. Anthony Hernandez does get popped really hard at the very beginning of every single fight, it feels like. This could be another opportunity for him to show heart and chin to win a fight after facing real adversity. I do like how Anthony Hernandez usually never bails on his grappling game plan, even whenever the fight gets a little bit crazy on the feet. That usually will bait a brawl out of some wrestling styles whenever they get cracked really hard. Like I could eat like a flush head kick or right hand down the pipe that clearly wobbles him and he'll still get in on the hips and complete a takedown. I respect it. The thing about it though is that Dolidze is pretty strong and he has some stiff power. Vettori was even like flinching a little bit whenever he was getting hit, and that dude has the craziest chin in the UFC. But he was more free to tee off against Marvin Vettori because he was a lot more fresh and less healthy off of the shoulder injury. It was pretty much a one-armed Vettori, and Dolidze still took him to a decision. and he just won on output in that entire fight. Vettori even still had moments at certain points, which it's like, that was a one-arm Vettori. Hernandez is still going to wrestle with Dolidze despite both of them being grapplers. That's never really mattered to him in the past. If you're good at grappling or not, his plan doesn't really change for you. And I don't think he's going to tire out before Dolidze does. Fluffy, he gets boomed on at the very beginning of every single fight that he has. Dolidze has issues with his gas tank, so this is where both of their vulnerabilities are. It could be a walk-off KO at the very start for Roman Dolidze, just because Anthony Hernandez always leaves himself open. But if that window closes and we get later on into like rounds 3, 4, 5, his cardio is going to completely abandon him. So if I'm weighing two outcomes, right? Anthony Hernandez getting his scalp removed by some strike at the very opening of this match, or Roman getting dominated with the grappling of Fluffy Hernandez through this heavily glazed full guard that he has until he gets tired and is either subbed or loses a decision, I'm going to pick Anthony Hernandez winning via a grindy decision victory, and I don't really see this fight going any other way. So that's going to be my prediction. I'm completely rolling out the possibility of Roman Dolidze coming out and knocking out this dude, because if he doesn't do that, his last finish in 5 fights is going to be via the ghost of Tyron Woodley against Kevin Holland, where he broke his rib. And man, they did Tyron Woodley so foul. Imagine, like, there was nobody in the Apex whenever this happened, so you clearly as day heard him say, "Oh, something happened." And then they had the ice pack in the cage. Like, bro, get this man in the locker room and then handle that there. They completely humiliated him in this moment. In the silence, while Colby Covington was, like, smiling and sticking his tongue out at him and, like, did him so bad. But yeah, these are going to be all my predictions, guys. Go ahead and please drop me a like, comment, and a sub. I will have more content for you fellas very soon. Catch you in the next one.